All right, welcome back, everybody. We've got our first talk of the event coming up right now. It's Zak, and he's going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons and DevOps in the context of information security. So welcome, Zak. Over to you.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm here today to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about working differently through fantasy role-playing. So almost 6 years ago, I found myself in a field in the middle of nowhere with about 1,000 other people. And like many others, I was smeared in face paint that was now dripping into my eyes, mixed with sweat, and I was clad in this latex mask that was sat uncomfortably tight to my face, as well as heavy leather armor that restricted my breathing. I was about to be thrust into a small circular pit marked out with wooden stakes in order to fight another person to prove my worth. This was me. Well, sort of. It was me playing a role that I'd created. In that moment, I was Aiko, an orc who had just come to the fantasy city of Anvil, and for the first time, just like Aiko, I'd come to a LARP. So it's probably best if I briefly explain what LARP is. It's an acronym for live action roleplay. Live action roleplay is a hobby that has hundreds of thousands of participants across the globe. It's a particular passion of mine, and it has been since the first moment that I put on that mask. And the hobby's made up of various events. So some of these are run every weekend on a particular day. Some of them take up whole weekends and they run quarterly or similar. And some, like the event that I run, only run once a year. Now, in each of these events is a different world, a world constructed by a game manager who writes the story and the lore behind the world and how it works, similar to how J.R.R. Tolkien built the world of Middle-earth. And they also write a set of rules that take into account things like combat, using magic, and how players interact with the world that's been built. And it's then up to the players to create a character within that world and play out a story that they want to see, as well as experience the story that the game manager has written. A LARP doesn't have to be just medieval fantasy, though. It can be any genre, like post-apocalyptic or science fiction, or even just modern day. And there's a LARP event to suit every taste, and everyone is catered to, no matter what their background. But the key features that I want to focus on LARP from today is taking on the role of a character, so putting yourself in someone else's shoes and acting differently, and the path to empathy that provides. Interacting with a created world, improvising around a set of rules and scenarios, and the flexibility that brings, adhering to the rules, but bringing your own contributions. And finally, creating a collaborative story, working with others to create an outcome that everyone can enjoy, have contributed to, and feel proud of. So what does this have to do with InfoSec? Well, I believe we can use LARP as a framework for better working. I've broken this down into typical role-play quests. So let's take a look at what quests we've got. So first off, we have fail safely. We need to learn how to make educational mistakes in a safety critical industry. Plan for risk, use lessons learned, and invest in skills like crisis management. And finally, foster a supportive community, creating genuine connections between employees and encouraging support across all levels. So let's start with our first quest, fail safely. Now, in LARP, when your character dies, it's sad, but it's not lethal. You don't actually die for real, though I've seen some fairly immersive games where you might come close. But ultimately, if your character dies, you just make a new one. And further to that, in some LARPs, you can have spells that let you divine threats and hidden enemies, or let you run a simulation of a situation before it goes ahead, essentially giving a group a second go at the encounter. But the biggest problem in high-stakes industries like information security is that if you fail, that's it. You could lose your job and essentially be blacklisted from the industry, and that's just on a personal level. The impact of a security failure to an organization can have drastic effects. And this isn't a healthy way to work. And one of the most effective ways to learn is by failing and making mistakes, and you gain valuable experience from that. So how do we deal with that? Well, we can certainly take the usual steps, such as training and consultancy and threat modeling, but these measures are usually placed in a firmly theoretical space and aimed more at organizational level changes. But I think we can use role-playing and war games to give staff at all levels a threat that needs to be dealt with. By establishing a credible scenario and getting employees to act how they would in a real environment, we can see areas for improvement and learning and potential choke points. It's an opportunity to learn from mistakes and emphasize where your organization excels. And beyond this, it also gives your staff a chance to shine with outside the box thinking, and they can bring their own experiences and their own contributions. So that's our first quest, failing safely. Now, let's have a look at planning for risk. I mentioned during failing safely that sometimes in LARP, characters can use a spell that lets them run a simulation of an encounter. And what that means is they'll be able to fight any enemies that are up ahead and find out what the threats are, what spells they might have, or any hidden traps. And after they've divined that, they can prepare accordingly, and they can choose which potions to take or what battle formation to pick. And this is where failing safely works so well. We know that the mage got taken out by an orc berserker, so they can reposition that mage to a safer location, maybe give them a healing potion or some more armor. Once your scenario or your war game issue has been dealt with, or worst case, it hasn't been dealt with, then it's important to gather all the participants together to review lessons learned, any mistakes that were made. It's the same principle. Look at where people failed or where they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Where were people's strong points? Should people be repositioned? You need to look at this both from an employee point of view, gathering self-reflection, opinions and ideas, but also from a data point of view. So how long did it take to respond? The measure of the threat's impact, if you can measure it. Now, in LARP, nothing hones your crisis management skills like 50 people charging towards you armed with spears and swords and all sorts of weaponry. In security, it's absolutely vital that we implement robust crisis management plans. And these scenarios are perfect for informing the decisions that you put into these plans. When I mentioned before about reviewing the scenarios and repositioning people, this is absolutely the place to do that. Was there someone who stayed particularly calm and took charge of the situation? Maybe someone who rose above their station? And make sure these people are utilizing your crisis management plans as valuable assets. Now, finally, the key advantage here is empathy. In LARP, you are literally putting yourself in someone else's, albeit fictional, shoes. When we instill empathetic ways of thinking into our risk management, it allows us to understand both the who and the why behind potential threats, but also understand the impact at all levels from customer to upper management. When threat modeling, go beyond your standardized templates and really think about who would want to perform these attacks and why. So that's our second question. We failed safely and we planned for risk. So finally, I want to cover our last quest, fostering a supportive community. Now, one of my favorite things about LARP is the community. The hobby brings people from all walks of life together to enjoy this collaborative and cooperative experience. Now, I think there's a strong case for mirroring this at work. The first thing I want to talk about is genuine connections. Now, I'm sure most of us here have attended training with toe curling icebreakers where we have to tell each other 3 facts or some other such trivial bits and bobs that we've all have forgotten by the time we're home for tea. But the thing is, particularly in industries like IT and InfoSec, people are drawn to roles because they're passionate about them. And that's how we should be connecting people, through a shared passion to deliver high standards, high protection, and high quality. Instead of learning how many cats Steve has, what's Steve's most pressing concern in security trends at the moment? What's been their most difficult situation? How did they overcome it? What's their proudest achievement? We are passionate people, and we should at every point share that passion with each other. Now, in LARP, mental health issues are endemic, but the beauty of the community is that because so many of us have faced those experiences and we've learned about them from others, we're all available as a massive support network. And I think this is something that more organizations need to adopt. Supporting mental health can't just be a buzzword and telling people it's Mental Health Awareness Day in a newsletter. We need to move past managers saying, okay, we'll take a sick day and get back in tomorrow with exasperation. Now, recently, mental health first aider courses have been popping up, and I see it as an absolute key investment for managers. And just beyond these courses, just encouraging more awareness of mental health at all levels and checking in with others and making sure that employees feel like they can share issues if they want to in an environment where they won't be punished or kept on watch for performance issues. And that goes hand in hand with my final point. Understand your employees. People often have a wealth of untapped potential from their hobbies and their home life. I spend a lot of time making 3D art and videos outside of work, and I've been given the chance to use those skills to help create training materials for staff in my full-time role. It's really engaging for me as an employee to use skills I have elsewhere in my job, and it's a benefit to the workplace that they get to use the results of those skills, because it makes me feel valued, because what I do in my spare time is valued. I'm valued as a person, not just as an output source. So that's our 3 quests. We've covered failing safely using roleplay, planning for risk, and using crisis management. And we've discussed how to foster a supportive work community. Now, in most LARPs, when you complete a quest, you get gold or jewels or some form of currency. Unfortunately, I can't offer you that today, but what we can see is the rewards that a LARP way of thinking can bring you. Staff who are empathetic to both stakeholder needs and to the potential threats to a company, who are practiced in specific and relevant crisis scenarios, knowing exactly what to do when issues strike, who are supportive of each other and come together to solve problems in the office and be there for those with problems outside the office, who are mentally healthy and productive thanks to practical and legitimate support from their managers and their wider organizations. And finally, the reward is a strong, unique, and effective way of training for preparing for risk with a new and interesting model. So that's everything from me today. I just wanted to say a few thanks in particular to the beer farmers for giving me the chance to talk and have this chance of speaking. To you who are listening, thanks for giving me your time. And I'd particularly like to thank James Bohr for suggesting that I take up this opportunity and generally for being an incredibly supportive friend in my career and my hobbies. I'm going to throw up some links to my contact information, some of the things I've talked about, as well as some shout outs, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Zach. That was absolutely fascinating, and the feedback that we've had in the Twitch has been overwhelmingly positive about your talk, and I think there's something in there for everybody, and it's a really important bunch of messages that you've shared. If we'll just keep an eye on the Twitch to see if anybody's got any questions for us. Give that a couple of seconds. Just a quick question from me, actually, Zach. So, what is it you actually? What's your job? What do you do?
So at the moment, I work for a local authority. I am a digital and technical solutions graduate. So basically looking at different areas in the business and seeing where we can kind of maybe improve processes to give better value and to help people. So it's kind of been they've kind of been putting me through uni. So I've been sort of bouncing around every single department within our technology and change. And it's been a really, eye-opening experience, considering they've kind of taken me from zero experience to someone who can actually input into the team. It's been really good.
Excellent. There has been a question: what makes a good scenario?
What makes a good scenario?
Yeah, in the context in the context of our world.
So I think there's things to consider is the context of what the company is, what you provide, and what your most kind of credible threats are going to be, but also looking at who's involved in it. So if you know your employees, how can you challenge them, and how can you present particular problems that they might have to struggle a little bit to overcome, but in the end kind of develop that understanding and new skills.
Awesome, Zach. I really enjoyed your talk a lot. Lots in common. I do have a question for you, though. I think one of the things you spoke about was, working with different people and stuff like that, collaboratively, which is, I think, a really outside the traditional sort of siloed version of IT and IT security that we see a lot of the times. Do you have any sort of comments you want to expand on that just a little bit? Love the talk, by the way.
Yeah, so thanks very much. I think, to be honest, that is one thing that needs to be pushed, is that collaborative working, not just between each other in an IT environment, but also between IT and the rest of kind of that structure. Because I think a lot of the time people are sort of maybe a bit intimidated by more technical roles, and actually I think there's definitely something to be said for giving people who work in non-technical roles at least a baseline understanding, as well as kind of supporting more technical roles in gaining those empathy skills and being able to relate to people no matter what their technical level is or what their past experience might be.
Great. Another question from the Twitch. The presentation was fascinating, and I think everyone in the Twitch is saying exactly the same thing. What are your thoughts on how you get this message over to management in the organization?
That is a difficult one, because I think particularly in some organizations there's a reluctance to change, especially with, I think actually one of the big problems really is that there's a lot of kind of management fads, and people pick up these kind of trends and then drop them quickly because they don't have longevity. But actually, I think with this kind of approach, with scenario-based approach, is that it's up to the managers to kind of develop it themselves and kind of have their own input. So I think there's less kind of onus on being a like basically an infosec meme, and more about encouraging people to input their own stuff. And I think that's what gives it more longevity.
Great. Fantastic. All right. I think that's about it in terms of the questions. Again, I want to say thanks very much, Zach. It can't have been easy being the first up. But you actually absolutely smashed it out of the park. So congratulations with that. And we'll take a little break and then we'll be back up around about 10 o'clock. So thanks a lot.